This is a quick 5-minute walkthrough of the Validato Security Posture Validation platform. And what I'm going to talk about today is what Validato is, what it does, how it can test an organization's security posture, internal security posture, and how we run our threat simulations. So what we're looking at here is a dashboard showing the internal risk posture of an organization based on threat simulations that we have run. And we can see a trend line of acceptable internal risk posture over time, which you can monitor as it goes up and down. And we're ultimately here to test resilience against particular threats that an organization may or is likely to face. And we measure resilience in terms of an organization's ability to detect threats and its control environment's ability to protect. There are some other key risk indicators here, which I can go into a little bit later on, but these are very much recommended by CISA in the United States. So I start with the scenario page. As a threat-informed or a threat-led testing platform, Validato answers questions about cyber threats and helps an organization, a security and IT team, to understand what the potential impact of those threats might be on their environment. And these can be very high level and generic, like the most common adversarial techniques used, or they can be quite specific, like, say, Lockbit ransomware here. And in this screen here, we have uh, hundreds of threat scenarios that have been pre-built and are ready to test and deploy just with 3 mouse clicks. And these are everything from threat scenarios from 10 years ago up until 1 week ago. The Validator platform is entirely based on MITRE ATT&CK. And what we actually are doing here is we are understanding what MITRE ATT&CK techniques are used by different threat actors in different scenarios. And we are trying to test the same type of manipulation of each associated MITRE ATT&CK technique associated with the threat scenario. So if I want to test an organization's resilience to ransomware, because we're using MITRE ATT&CK techniques here, we can bundle together a number of threat actors and the techniques that they are exploiting. So in this particular case, I'm going to walk through this quite quickly. If I want to test top ransomware techniques, I just simply click on Run. Then I choose a technical environment to run my test in. So Validato is a sequential testing tool, which means that you test a threat in a technical environment. So I'm going to choose, in this case, Windows 11. And now I want to understand who has access to that technical environment. So we support interactive Windows user profiles. So I can log in and out with different user personas. And I want to understand, is there any ability for a particular user group to be manipulated and exploited by ransomware threat actors in this case? And how far could they get in the organization, or could they cause damage? So in this particular example here, I'm going to run this test using a sales persona with the privilege and access rights of that role group. And then after this test is run, I might use the same ransomware scenario in Windows 11 and choose maybe a finance or a marketing profile or some other different low or high level privilege profile. I can put some notes here about maybe different security control configurations if I want to test either different protection configurations or detection configurations. Otherwise, I just click on Run Scenario. Super, super simple. And what that will now do is it will go off and run an attack simulation that basically mimics the behaviors exploited and used by the top ransomware threat actors. And these are all mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, as I mentioned before. And to a large extent, MITRE ATT&CK is a knowledge base or knowledge library of all of the ways that a Windows, Linux, or Mac environment or cloud environment can be manipulated. And as you can see overlaid in red here are those MITRE ATT&CK techniques that have been observed to be manipulated by the top 10 ransomware groups. These are all red at the moment because we're in the process of running the simulation, but it will take about an hour to 2 hours to get the results. So let's have a look at some of those results that we did earlier. So here's the same test that we ran here called Top Ransomware Techniques. And I can immediately start to see some interesting things. So again, we ran this test in a Windows 11 environment, and we used the sales persona as the test user profile. And what we can see from a MITRE ATT&CK perspective, based on the top ransomware threat actors, is that we can see some really obvious gaps, defensive capability gaps in our environment. So these are the things that ransomware threat actors could manipulate if this was a live environment. So right now we're looking at this from a protection perspective. So our controls, but also the configurations of our Windows and Linux environment. So we can see immediately here that if a threat actor gains initial access into an environment, they will be able to, or they could use the schedule task and the PowerShell functions that are actually still available on this sales user profile. So question number one is, do those users need access to those functions? And what can we do about that? And we can also look at this from a detection perspective and make sure that we are optimizing our visibility into adversarial behaviors. And if I look at this equally on the execution and persistence tactical phases here, we also didn't really detect the manipulation of scheduled task or PowerShell either. So in this particular case, the top 10 ransomware techniques which we ran in Windows 11 on the sales profile resulted in us not being able to detect the manipulation of these really critical functions, and we also didn't stop them. So that is pretty bad news. So we want to basically make this matrix green. And by doing so, we're going to disrupt or stop the attack path from being successful. We're going to make it really challenging for the adversary to be successful. So we can either do that by accepting the risk, and we can suppress the finding. And we have a suppression list over here for auditors and for other people who want to understand why we accepted those risks. But we can also configure our environment, either our security controls or our Windows and Linux settings also. So in today's demonstration, I'm not going to go into too much detail other than to say that on the protection score here, if you scroll down, we provide a full guided procedure on how to implement a GPO in Windows to restrict or harden the PowerShell function, which is what we're going to look at here. And if you follow that procedure and then click on rerun the test, then that PowerShell exploitation should turn green later on. You can then compare the results over time and see, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? You can also export our test data, which is, again, unbiased and independent test data. And for the most part, also, if you run these tests very frequently, they're going to be pretty current reflection on your security control performance. And we can map our test data to different control frameworks. So NIST 853, ISO 2701, CSF critical controls, and the NCSC's CAF framework in the UK. So in a nutshell, we advise our clients to run these tests into different technical environments against different user profiles, turn the results green, and obviously, because this is a digital outside-in assumption on the attack process here, that typically you start on the left-hand side and you make your way to the right. But ultimately, if these are all green, it's going to be really challenging for the adversary to be successful in this environment. And because we're talking about MITRE ATT&CK techniques, if we turn PowerShell green, it means that any other adversary that also uses PowerShell, which is a very large proportion of threat actors, they also will be prevented from manipulating PowerShell on those user profiles. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour. Once you have tested different threat scenarios, you can run these on a weekly 2 weekly, monthly basis, whatever you like, you can then start to manage your overall risk posture based on the threat landscape. And these indicators essentially all need to be 100% or green, ultimately, either because you're accepting risk or because you're hardening and restricting the manipulation of those functions. So quick whistle stop tour of Validato. Please contact us if you would like to understand more.